Anyone who studies the Bible in depth will sooner or later discover that repetition is one of the key ways the biblical writers communicate. But how do they actually use it? Or to put it another way, what kinds of repetition should you pay attention to when you study your Bible? And what are the benefits of noticing them? Let's take a look. Hey, welcome to Masterpiece Bible. My name is Chris, and I want to help you take your Bible study experience to the next level and discover just how beautiful and fascinating this book really is. If you're new here, thanks so much for stopping by, and of course, make sure you hit that subscribe button and activate the bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming exciting episodes. So in the last episode, we discovered that one of the crucial ways the Bible works is through repetition. By the way, if you haven't watched that video yet, make sure to check it out right up here. So repetition is key, and the fascinating thing is that it's not just used in one, but in multiple ways. In fact, there are at least 4 kinds of repetition you should be aware of if you want to study this book in a deeper way and discover what a masterpiece it really is. Number 1, words and phrases. This is probably the most common and also the most obvious kind of repetition found in the Bible. Once you're aware of the importance of repetition, and if you use an accurate translation, you can find repeated words and phrases in pretty much every text in the Bible. In some cases, these repetitions help us to discover what the main subject of a passage is. Like in Genesis 17, where the word covenant is repeated 13 times. Or in Romans 4, where the word righteousness is repeated 8 times, the word faith 10 times, and the word believe 6 times. Or in Psalm 136, where the phrase, "for his grace endures forever," is repeated no less than 26 times. Sometimes the repeated words and phrases also help us to see how a passage or even a whole book is set up or structured. Like the words immediately, teaching, authority, and unclean spirit that help us to see the chiastic structure of the story of the healing of a demoniac in Mark 1:21-28. Or the phrase, "these are the generations," that repeatedly occurs in the book of Genesis and divides it into different sections. And sometimes the repeated words and phrases also help us to see connections between different parts of a text or between different characters. Like, for example, in Mark 5, where the term daughter and the phrase 12 years are connected to both the woman with the blood flow and to Jairus' daughter. Or the terms name and build that highlight the contrast between the tower builders in Genesis 11 and Abram in Genesis 12. Number 2, sentences and paragraphs. It's not just short elements like words and phrases that are repeated in the Bible, but also longer elements like sentences and even entire paragraphs. As with words and phrases, sometimes the repetition is word for word, sometimes there are slight but significant changes. Examples of the first category would be the phrase, "and it was evening and it was morning," which occurs 6 times in the creation account, but then significantly is missing in the verses on the 7th day. Or the observation, "in those days there was no king in Israel," which serves as a kind of thematic refrain at the end of the book of Judges, and also provides a connection to the Samuel books, where kingship is obviously an important topic. In the story of Naboth's vineyard in 1 Kings 21, on the other hand, we have repetition with variation. Notice, in verse 3, Naboth tells Ahab, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." But in verse 6, Ahab tells his wife Jezebel that Naboth said, "I will not give you my vineyard," making it sound like Naboth simply refused the most generous offer of the king, while at the same time completely leaving out the fact that the vineyard was an inheritance of the fathers, and therefore, according to divine law, was not supposed to be sold. So in this case, the variation gives us deeper insight into Ahab's character. A classic example of an entire paragraph being repeated is found in number 7, where the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel bring the exact same offerings for the dedication of the altar at the sanctuary. Now, if we wrote this text today, we would probably mention the list of offerings once, and then say something like, "and the other 11 leaders brought exactly the same things as the first one." But the biblical author spells out the exact same list of offerings 12 times. For one thing, this gives the text a certain rhythm and solemnity. But it also emphasizes the complete unity and harmony of all the tribes, as well as the total and identical support of the sanctuary and of the God who dwelled there by all Israel. But you only get a feel for that once you take the time to actually read the entire text. So try it out sometime. Number 3, scenes and stories. Maybe you've noticed that sometimes entire scenes or even stories are repeated once or several times in other places of the Bible. This happens quite a bit in books like Samuel, Kings, or Chronicles, or in certain chapters of the book of Isaiah, and of course in the Gospels. In most of these cases, there are slight variations between the different versions of the scene or story, usually because the author wants to highlight certain things that underscore the message he's trying to get across. That's why it's so important to look at each version in its particular context. But there's also another variant of this type of repetition where rather than the same story being told several times, we have several stories describing different but very, very similar events. For example, in Genesis 12, 20, and 26, we find 3 stories that all feature a patriarch who lives in a foreign country and claims that his wife is his sister because he's afraid that the people of the country will kill him if they find out she's his wife. In all 3 cases, the ruler of the country finds out the truth and confronts the patriarch saying, "What have you done to us?" Or take the annunciation of a son's birth scene, or the encounter with a future wife at a well scene, both of which occur several times in both the Old and New Testament. Now the big question obviously is, why do the biblical authors do this? Well, for one thing, they want to make us as readers aware of certain important themes in the Bible. But they also want us to connect different parts and different characters in the Bible so that we can compare them, but also so we can recognize that they all belong to the same big story. A story which climaxes in the story of Jesus in the Gospels, where interestingly, many of the same scenes and stories reappear in some form. Number 4, motifs and themes. In addition to word-based repetition, there's also repetition of certain images or ideas. In other words, of motifs and themes. You may have noticed, for example, that in the book of Genesis, there are quite a number of stories about deception. It starts, of course, with the deception of Eve in the garden. Then we have Abram, who deceives Pharaoh. Later he becomes Abraham and deceives Abimelech. We have Jacob, who deceives his brother Esau and his father Isaac. Laban deceives Jacob. Jacob deceives Laban. The sons of Jacob deceive the people of Shechem, as well as their father Jacob. And finally, Joseph deceives his brothers. So clearly, deception plays a prominent role in Genesis. Just like brothers, or barren women, or the concept of blessing, or fire in the stories of Samson in the book of Judges, or the Redeemer in the book of Ruth, or sending messengers in 2 Samuel 8-15, or water in the first 5 chapters of John. And the list could go on because there are literally thousands of these kinds of motifs and themes in the Bible just waiting to be discovered. So if you haven't noticed some of the things I just mentioned before, make sure to look out for them the next time you study those books. And of course, if you can think of any others, write them in the comments. So there you have it, 4 important kinds of repetition in the Bible. But maybe at this point you're saying, okay, that's all nice, but so what? Why should I pay attention to this kind of stuff? 2 things. Number 1, because it helps you to see the beauty and intentional design of the Bible so much better. And number 2, because it makes it so much easier to discover what the biblical author is trying to say. And both of those things together make Bible study just so much more enjoyable. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. And I also want to take a moment to thank all you guys who subscribed to the channel. Maybe you saw it. We made it to 500. Thank you so much for all your support, for liking, sharing, spreading the word. Really, really appreciate it. As always, stay safe, stay healthy out there, and of course, enjoy studying the Bible. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode. Ciao.